Today's show is brought to you by Cotswolds Outdoor, Cross Bikes, Garmin, and Cumulus. Hello and welcome to We Need More Heroes. In the age of Donald Trump as president and Kim Kardashian a role model for millions, it's easy to lose hope. But there are still brilliant people out there who can inspire us to live better. Join me, George Beasley, on a mission around the globe to find them. We Need More Heroes aims to inspire and guide ordinary people to live extraordinary lives. Visit weneedmoreheroes.co for show notes and more info. If you enjoy the episode, please leave us a review and rating on iTunes and subscribe if you'd like to hear more. Thanks for listening. So hello and welcome to another episode of We Need More Heroes. I'm currently in Bozeman, Montana, as my girlfriend and I are doing the cycle tour from Alaska to Argentina. A big 17,000 miles. So we're doing it for fun, adventure, and raising money for the Stroke Association. So looking outside, the sun is beaming and the snow-capped mountains are glistening in the background. So I certainly can't complain. And I'm so excited to be joined by today's guest, who is an adventurer, airline pilot, and public speaker. We would be here all day if I was listening all the amazing things that he's done. So here's just a few to get us started. So he was the first Canadian to summit Everest without oxygen. He solo rode the Atlantic in 53 days. He climbed the highest mountain in Iraq, and all this and loads more, whilst also being a loving husband and dad. So without further ado, I give you today's guest, Laval St Germain. Laval, welcome to the show.
Thanks, George. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to speaking with you.
Yeah, can't wait to get into it. So I did just think we had a little chat before we started, and your name is how do you say your second name? I gave it the sort of French Swiss pronunciation. Well, what do you normally go for, Laval?
Yeah, it's a French Canadian name. So when it's English, it's Laval St Germain. Uh-huh. But in French, it's Laval St Germain, and if it's in France, we say Laval St Germain. So there's obviously, just like your accent is different than my Canadian accent, there's a three different ways to pronounce it. But French Canadian way is Laval St Germain, but you go ahead and just say Laval St Germain. That's fine. Sounds
so much better when you say it.
Yeah, I could also call you Georges as well.
That would be great. So just going back to how we connected, I launched this podcast a couple of months ago, and it's been great fun so far. And I was so pleased when you reached out and sent over your adventure resume that was just packed with all the cool stuff that I listed right at the start. And I just thought that you'd be the perfect guest for We Need More Heroes. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, George. I mean, you do have a very lofty name to your podcast, and I had to go to your website and take a look at it, and I think I made it pretty clear in my email to you that I did not see myself as a hero. But then I started to look at some of the guests, and I thought, yeah, it seems like a good fit. So really happy that we've connected, and sorry we didn't meet when you went through Calgary. You're only probably about 1,000 kilometers south of us now, but yeah. I'm happy to be here.
I think you got in touch a couple of days or maybe a week after we'd left Calgary. So it would have been great to see you in person, but one day we'll do it. So I always get started with some rapid response questions to get the adventure juices flowing. So you just say, first thing that comes to mind. They're pretty lighthearted and not so serious. So you ready?
Go ahead.
Okay. Batman or Superman?
Superman, because he can fly.
He can fly, yeah. And a lot of people go for Superman because Batman's not really a superhero, but some people like that he just uses his wit and his money and his charm. But Superman's pretty friggin' awesome. So what did you want to be growing up?
An airline pilot.
And you did it.
Yeah.
How few people do that? They sort of have a dream that when they're younger, they want to be in the army or a truck driver or any of those like sort of things that we want when we're young. But you actually did become an airline pilot. So how did you get into that, and how long have you been doing that for?
I've been doing it's the only thing I've ever done. So as a young boy, we always had an airplane sort of kicking around, and my dad introduced me to flying at a very young age. And he saw me reading a bunch of sort of typical boys type adventure books and magazines, specifically National Geographic. And he sort of took me aside one day and he says, "You really want to go to all these places, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." And he said, "Well, the only way to get there is going to become an airline pilot, because with an airline pilot, you have travel passes, reduced rate travel, and airlines all over the world. So why don't you become a pilot?" So at age 15, we drove to the airport in the town we were living in, and I went for what's called a FAM flight, a familiarization flight, and came back. And that night, he signed me up for the ground school, which is the classroom part of becoming a pilot. And off I went, and it worked out very well for me timing-wise. So that's when I was 15, and 6 years later, I was hired as an airline pilot. So I've been doing it for a long time now.
Do you ever get scared, or are you just sort of over that now?
No, I don't. I mean, once you understand what's involved in airline flying specifically, and all the redundancies we have built in and all the procedures that we use to keep it safe. And if you're flying in Western Europe or North America, or places like Japan and Australia and New Zealand, it's incredibly safe. The standards that Western trained pilots have are just about perfect now. There's very, very few airline accidents in sort of the developed world. So it's very safe. I never get nervous, but it's quite funny if we're flying. Let's say we're flying across the pond from Canada, and I remember one flight, my wife and I were flying across, and we hit some fairly bad turbulence. So I was looking down at a magazine or a book, and I was in my head kind of thinking, yeah, this is actually really rough, but not in any way that would concern me. But she always looks at me if we get into a rough situation in an airplane to see what my reaction is. So I looked at her with a terrified face, tightened my seatbelt, and she was across the aisle. I reached across the aisle and I said, "We better hold hands." And she has not forgiven me since then. But I never get nervous as a passenger. But I think it has to do with the physical environment. You're crammed into an aluminum tube, far too many people in there, not a lot of room, and you feel like you've lost complete control. And that's really what it is. I don't think you feel the same if you're in a bus or the back of a lorry driving down the road, but for some reason with airline flying, people don't like that loss of control. Well, and I guess in probably about 15 or 20 years, it'll be the ultimate when we have completely autonomous airplanes flying around. So,
yeah, that's going to be next level. I remember I was traveling in Bolivia a few years ago, and I was trying to get out to the jungle for this big ayahuasca ceremony that I've been planning for a while, and it was really remote. And I'd got out there, and I'd taken a flight to somewhere on a really like a normal sized plane, and then you had to switch over into this tiny little plane. There was me and one other white dude, and we were standing at the airport, and I was just having a chat with him. And then they rolled up the plane, and it was a 16-seater. It was tiny. It looked like it was from about 1,000 years ago. It had 4 propellers that had just sort of paint peeling off them. Mm-hmm. And they tried to start the plane, like pulling the propellers around, and a mechanic came out, no shirt on, the guy just walking around in a pair of board shorts with a cigarette in his mouth, sort of bashing stuff with a wrench. And I was just thinking, this doesn't seem very rigorous. Like, this is not the guy that I really want in charge of airline safety.
It sounds frankly a little bit unbelievable. But having said that, it just shows you that even in the worst conditions, with the sort of the slackest regulations in the world, airplanes don't really crash that often. So, I mean, it's not a typical day at Heathrow for sure, but there's that old saying that if your surgeon makes a mistake, you die. If your pilot makes a mistake, you die and he dies. So your pilots tend to not make mistakes. So we have a lot of skin in the game.
A lot of the reasons why plane crashes happen is because of cultural norms, like the second in command doesn't want to tell the pilot that he's done something wrong, or simple tiredness as opposed to mechanical failure. So I guess there's some stuff in place to try and help that now, is there?
Oh, absolutely. And it's fully probably 98 or 99% of airline accidents are due to human factors. So that means either a mechanic working on the airplane made a mistake, or far more likely the pilots have made a mistake. And one of the issues you're speaking about is a co-pilot, or what we call a first officer, unable to tell a captain that he's making a mistake because the captain's got more experience, he's intimidating, he's more senior, that type of thing. That is was traditionally an issue in Asian airlines because of the cultural difference and the formality between different, I guess it would be training or skill levels there. But that's largely been trained out now through a process that we call crew resource management, CRM training. So in Western Europe and North America, the first officers through a training process that we call crew resource management are specifically trained to speak up, and they're actually encouraged to do so. So if I'm flying with the most junior first officer, most junior co-pilot, and I'm making an error, he'll flat out tell me with no reservation and no hesitation and no repercussions for doing it. That's their job. So that has largely disappeared out of the airline business. It's something that has been so successful that hospitals and the medical industry, if you want to call that, have adopted this type of training. So it's something that's been unbelievably successful, and that's why we've got such a low accident rate, why it's so safe.
Feeling a lot better about flying now. So on to the third quick fire question. So if you could have any superpower, I mean, I can maybe guess it from part one, but what would it be?
Well, I don't think it would be flying, although it would be nice to just fly without any equipment on. So mind reading.
Mind reading. Nice. Yeah. Well, why? What would you do with that?
Wouldn't that be an advantage though in life, I think? When you're speaking to somebody or trying to make a deal or negotiating on a new car or asking for directions somewhere, I think that'll be advantageous. It might not be good, but I think it's going to come with goods and bads. But yeah, I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah, I could see that being one of those things that you'd think would be amazing, and then you realize how much of an asshole everyone is.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of repercussions.
Okay, great stuff. So we've covered a little bit about your background and your journey into becoming a pilot, but how did you get into adventure? And can you just tell the story of how you transitioned into that?
I think it was largely my parents. My mom was very focused on health and fitness. My dad was focused on more intellectual pursuits, reading. And however, he was also an outdoorsman. And what I mean by that is he did a lot of hunting and fishing, canoeing, sort of these stereotypical Canadian activities that I know you must think we all do. We don't live in igloos and we don't all canoe, but that's what we did. So it would be weekend canoe trips around the area that I lived in here in the province of Alberta, and hunting trips. And that type of stuff really started my love of the outdoors. And my mom's encouragement to stay fit, I think, really assisted in that. And then my dad's insistence on reading. So making sure that we read about what was going on in the world, being interested in current affairs, a subscription to National Geographic, like I mentioned earlier, having Hemingway books laying around, Jack London books laying around, reading about Shackleton, discussing it at the dinner table. That just set me off in that direction. And then I have parents that would never discourage me. So if I wanted to become an airline pilot, it was encouraged. If I wanted to tell them that I wanted to go to all these places in the National Geographic or in these crazy books that I read as a child, they never ever hesitated to tell me that I could do that. What they did insist on is that I figured out how to do it. So wanting something wasn't good enough. They wanted me to figure out the steps I needed to accomplish to get those things done. So it's parenting, I believe, that is largely responsible for that. And the fact that I think some of the stuff maybe you may be born with. So born with this need to travel and see the world. I guess that if I were born in Europe, 300 years ago, like my relatives were, German on my mom's side and French on my dad's side, I'd be probably one of the people that got into a ship and headed for the New World. And it's maybe something that's been hardwired into me.
What is it that draws you to adventure and to these incredibly difficult pursuits and dangerous explorations?
I mean, you're traveling right now, and you're going to experience some hardships. I know you already have. And however, when you get back to the UK, and after about a week of being at home and finally unpacking all of your gear and cleaning it and you're going to probably not remember so much the hardships, but you're going to remember those special moments that you experienced, whether it was on the Yukon River or in a desert highway in the U.S. And I think that's what people have, is a real ability to forget about suffering, forget about pain, and to remember and cherish those really unusual moments, unique moments, and incredible moments that you get when you travel, whether it's topping out on a mountain and seeing what's on the other side, even though nowadays you and I both can go to Google Earth and see exactly what it's going to look like on the other side. We can literally fly by the mountain in Google Earth, but there's something about climbing over the top and looking into that next valley, or crossing an ocean. Even though it's something that's done every day, thousands of times a day, airplanes flying over the Atlantic, for example, or crossing oceans, there's something hardwired in people that wants to see what's on the other side, or wants to cross a blank spot on a map. And it's afterwards, I think, that where you reap the benefits. Somehow your life is richer for having done that.
It's not getting to the top, because you could be flown to the top of a big mountain and take the view in and see what's on the other side, which is certainly part of it. But that wouldn't have the same sense of accomplishment or wonder or awe, and nothing makes you feel alive. I've only done tiny little adventures and mountain climbs in comparison, but the first 6,000 meter one that I did down in Bolivia, it was so incredibly tough, and we had no experience and not the right gear, and nobody really knew what was going on. But the feeling of there's almost something pleasurable about knowing that you're doing something difficult and hard, and then finally getting to the top and doing it, realizing what you're made of, and having that very vivid experience of feeling the pain in your legs and the sweat dripping down your forehead, and then you get to the top, and that moment where you actually get there is makes it all worth it.
Yeah, it's because of the suffering that's involved, and the dreaming about it and wondering what it's going to be like. And it's ironic that you mentioned Bolivia, because what really set me off on high altitude climbing was my early 20s, flew down to La Paz and jumped in the back of a farm truck, and I climbed the highest mountain in Bolivia, and I just about died up there from cerebral edema, but I summited, snowblind, got back down, and we hitchhiked back to La Paz. But that, to me, was such an incredible trip that anchored me, or almost like a fish hook. It hooked into my skin adventuring, and I cannot get it out ever since then.
Can you remember which mountain that was?
Cerro Sajama, the highest mountain in Bolivia.
Yeah. So that must have been quite the expedition if you got cerebral edema.
Yeah, it's 21,500 feet, and we were on the summit 7 days after leaving Miami. So just no chance to acclimatize at all. And 7 days from sea level to 21.5 it'll kill you. So, but we made it. And we got down, and I'll never forget it.
Some of us seem to seek pain and avoid pleasure until you get to the top.
Yeah, it's. I think especially now, where any type of discomfort, any type of risk is completely frowned upon. Children go on a field trip with their schools, and there's rules, like a mountain biking field trip, and there's rules that you can never see daylight between the child's tire and the ground, and if that occurs, the child will be suspended from that trip. And to go mountain biking in the mountains and not get a little air off of a root or over a rock, or to have some fun and ride at speed, there's just no acceptance anymore of personal responsibility, and it's something that I'm struggling with all the time. This the nanny state that we're slowly devolving into. Nobody's allowed to either experience any kind of discomfort, any type of suffering, and no insult. You can never be insulted, because if you're insulted, then it's life is too unfair now. So
a lot of the time they're coming from the right place. They're trying to make sure that people don't hurt themselves and die, but they're missing out an incredibly important part of the story. So you've done all of these cool adventures and these and these great explorations and great trips, but which one are you most proud of, and I guess why?
The one, though, for me that was the most difficult and was the rowing across the Atlantic solo from Canada to France last summer, because you've been to my part of the world. There's not a single drop of water around anywhere other than a few rivers and lakes, and very far from the ocean. I'm not a maritime person. I've never sailed. I've been on a ferry from British Columbia out to the Queen Charlotte Islands. So I sort of put together a curriculum of what I needed to know to row an ocean. I didn't have to change my physical training that much, although I did some more rowing type exercises in the gym. The rest of it was just learning about the ocean and learning about rowing and not rowing, but navigating at sea and that type of stuff. So I had to do my rescue training. I had to do my the sea survival training. I had to do my day skipper, which is a very introduction to life on a boat close to shore. And then I did my yacht master ocean training so that I knew how to function away from shore. All the navigation stuff that was involved, my marine radio operator's license. And then I simply read and read and read. I read about more disasters at sea. I read books on storm tactics. I read books on surviving at sea. I read all the accounts of different ocean rowers. I talked to a Canadian who had attempted to row from Senegal to Costa Rica. They ended up being rescued, but I really applied myself. But having said that, when I got to that dock ready to shove off at 5:45 in the morning on June 15th, 2016, it was really, really stepping out of my comfort zone. It's difficult now to relate what that was like, pushing off into the cold, gray North Atlantic on a rainy, cool day in Halifax, Canada, was something that I'll quite possibly never experience again, that level of wondering what's going to happen out there on the waves and knowing that I had 2 to 3 months of living on a 20-foot long by 4-foot wide boat. So that was something that really challenged me. It didn't challenge me physically, it challenged me psychologically, that trip. But I'm so pleased now, like we spoke earlier, that I've done it. I think it's made life a lot richer, and it's given me a deep love and appreciation of the ocean, which I didn't have before. I'm now as attracted to the ocean as I am to the mountains.
Was there anything that you did to train your mental resilience, or even just being alone for that long? I guess that's the longest you've probably ever been alone for.
Yeah. So first part of your question, I didn't train. I didn't even think about it, actually. I think that's something that after years of adventuring, of overcoming hardships, self-imposed hardships in the outdoors, that I knew I had the mental toughness. I knew that what I was doing was very dangerous. I just had to be hyper aware of that. So I'm a guy who follows procedures. I'm a guy who uses checklists. I think because of my airline training, I'm very used to not straying from procedures once they've been designed and drawn up and written down. And I just did not take any shortcuts while I was out on the water. So psychologically, I think you just get on with it and you deal with it as it occurs. But you also, what I always realize is that other people have done this type of thing in far worse conditions. 100 years ago, for example, or a refugee going across the Mediterranean. They've done stuff that is far tougher than a roughy-tufty Himalayan climber in a state-of-the-art ocean rowing vessel built actually in the UK by Rannoch Adventures. And this thing is literally like a space capsule. It's so robust and tough. So you sort of have to measure it. You sort of have to balance the fact that, yes, it is a dangerous endeavor. However, it could be far worse. It's not an open dory, that's for sure. So it's like me when we talked about earlier, but when I'm flying as a passenger prior to recording, when I'm flying as a passenger, I'm not concerned because I know what's going on. I know the redundancies. I know all the redundant systems. I know the procedures and the regulations that the pilots follow. Just like I knew that boat and I knew that how tough it was, and I knew that with GPS navigation and the systems I had on the airplane that I was going to eventually pitch up on the beach somewhere in France. So I just had to make sure that I didn't get broadsided by a wave, get hit by a boat. But, I did have dark moments for sure. I had storms psychologically that were very tough that lasted days and days. And you're talking about up to 25-foot high waves crashing into the boat at night. You can't see them coming. near misses with ships.
Whew.
Being surrounded by whales, and you're worried that they're gonna, knock the rudder off the boat. So, yeah, you do have your dark moments, but right now, when I'm thinking about it, speaking to you, looking into this microphone, it was nothing but positive, other than the cost. But it was nothing but positive. But having said all that, George, it was for a good cause. It was called the Confront Cancer Ocean Row, and I was raising money for the Alberta Cancer Foundation, which is the provincial cancer foundation in the province here in Canada where I live, and that was because of we all know people who've been impacted by cancer, and I thought that the way I thought about it was that if you were to show up at your doctor's office and had a lump looked at, for example, and you sit down and your doctor says, "Here's the story. This lump is cancerous. You're going to need 9 months of chemotherapy. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. We'll see what happens on the other side. It's going to be hell." It's much like stepping into an ocean rowing boat. I thought, although as a patient, you're not prepared to step into that stormy cancer ocean, but as a cancer patient, you're literally brought to the dock, told to get into that boat. And here's the story. You're going to be going through months and months of treatment. You're going to have nausea, just like the seasickness that I experienced. You're going to have storms of pain. You're going to have storms of anxiety. Even though you're going to be surrounded by family, even though I'm going to be surrounded by SATCOM equipment, you're still on your own. And you don't know if you're going to make it to the other side. I probably had a far better chance, obviously, as an ocean rower than somebody who had a cancer diagnosis, but I really thought it was a metaphor or a good analogy to think about, that walking into your doctor's office, being put into that cancer boat and saying, "See you later, we'll see you on the other side." But in between, it's going to be hell. You're going to have some bright spots, but it's going to be a real struggle. And that's why I did it. That's why I used the ocean row as a metaphor for people's experience with cancer.
Did you fund it yourself, or did you look for sponsorship?
I was all these adventures I've done have been funded by myself. On this expedition, though, Jana, my wife, very clearly stated that I better get some sponsorship. So about a third of the expedition was covered. But as you know, these are extremely expensive endeavors. To do an ocean rowing crossing is very expensive. So you're talking in the neighborhood of 60,000 British pounds type of thing, and yeah, wow. It's an expensive trip. I did raise money for cancer, so that's fine. But I also don't have a lot of toys in my garage. I don't have a motorboat. I don't have a motorcycle. I don't golf. I spend my time on adventure travel, doing stuff with my kids, and almost all human powered. So it's a real intentional decision I've made to spend my money, to spend our money on this type of thing, where what you're doing really is collecting experiences and challenging yourself. And I think that's far better than having a garage full of toys that you use a few days of the year and burn a lot of fuel. That's my opinion. And I think it's a good investment. And so far it's enriched us.
Yeah, definitely. Spend money on experiences, not material things, unless they help you have a cool experience. Yeah,
exactly.
And for somebody that's thinking about doing a big expedition, something like that, an ocean crossing or similar, you collected and read all of these things and articles and resources. Did you manage to put them together in some kind of library?
No, but I've considered that, actually. I've considered putting together a booklet on that. I could put together a booklet on climbing an 8,000 meter peak, what you need to know, and then I could do one on ocean rowing. I've actually considered that. But what I did obviously worked, because I had a total of about 2 hours in that ocean rowing boat on the Crouch River in Essex. Just after it was built, I brought the whole family to Burnham on Crouch to see the boat at Rannoch Adventure. And I wanted them to see the boat so they knew that how robust it was and how safe it was. And that made a huge difference, because anytime you mention a rowboat to somebody, they think of an open dory, which is ridiculous. It's distantly related to an ocean dory or an open dory, but only because it floats in salt water. So for them to see it was very comforting for them. And then I actually took my son out rowing it on the River Crouch. And so he sort of became sort of a touch point between my wife and my daughter. And when it came to questions about the boat or the technical aspects of the boat, which I thought was kind of cool, that he could sort of be a go-between. So I had no experience ocean rowing at all. It was all self-taught on the North Atlantic. And it worked out really well because the weather worked out initially very well, and it became bigger and bigger and bigger storms built as I got further along. So I had the ability to get used to worse and worse waves and worse winds. And so that it wasn't like I got out and a week later I got hit by a hurricane. But it worked out really well. So there is luck involved for sure, but I was well prepared.
What would be your one bullet point or bit of advice for somebody doing that kind of thing? Would it be to prepare as you did rigorously, or what would you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, preparation is everything. It's I've mentioned this in different interviews before, but there's that famous quote from Archilochus, the Greek philosopher. And we don't rise to the level of our expectations or hopes or dreams. We fall to the level of our training. So if you just hope you're going to get across the North Atlantic, I mean, there's probably a slim chance you'll drift across and make it. But preparation is what's going to keep you alive when the shit hits the fan. And it does hit the fan a lot when you're doing these types of trips. Just like your bicycle ride from Anchorage to South America, you're going to have the shit is going to hit the fan, and preparation is going to help. And what you've learned, I know you've mentioned that you weren't a cyclist before, but what you've learned in the last several thousand kilometers is going to help you as you head south, and you're going to be able to use those experiences to successfully and safely ride the trip. And then on that, you're also going to need some luck. And luck is purely the roll of the dice sometimes, but it's also, luck is what happens. That one quote is, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. So we can't completely make our own luck, but we can certainly do what it takes to take advantage of good luck situations or survive bad luck situations.
Yeah, I love that you bring up the role of luck. It seems to be it's something that I think a lot about, but America is the land that forgot luck. They sort of tend to take that out of the equation, and you just always hear just put in the hard work and you will succeed, and or if you just try hard enough then you'll make it. And they miss out the role of luck in life, and it's incredibly important, and it can cause so much anxiety and trouble. And I think you're absolutely right that winners create their own luck. Or we go out, and if you're an extremely sociable person, then you may say, oh, I've got such a lucky friend at work. He's always meeting cool people. But in all likelihood, he tends to be somebody who talks to people a lot. And so he meets a lot of people and meets, therefore, cool people. But it's certainly a key part of the equation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The sort of the typical American story is everybody can make it here and everybody's the same. I'm talking about the U.S. right now, speaking if I was an American, and pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. But at the same time, you have to be born in the right socioeconomic class. You have to be of the right race, unfortunately. You have to speak the right language. You have to be born in the right zip code. Mm-hmm. And all that contributes to your success more so than pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. So you still have to work hard for sure, but you can't blame it all on hard work or accredit it all to hard work. It's going to be just the luck of where you're born.
Absolutely, yeah. We're all equal in the States as long as you're a man, white, and middle class, and then you're ready to go.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So on these big adventures, you mentioned that you're fairly rigorous and you follow these checklists, and your training as a pilot helped with that. But how do you think about risk management, and where do you draw the line? Because it seems like you're drawn to accomplish these very dangerous things, and yet you have a family who depend on you, and there's only so much risk mitigation that you can do. Like you say, there could be a 1 in 50 storm, like some freak weather accident. So how do you think about that?
Oh, I think about it all the time. I mean, it's a constant struggle as an adventurer, and an adventurer with with a family or anybody that depends on you. It's a constant struggle, and it's something that torments me and eats at me and wears me down at times when I'm on these trips. These things are selfish, plain and simple. And I don't care if you're raising money for cancer or for injured veterans or whatever you're doing. You're still doing it to, like we spoke about earlier, to enrich yourself and to add experiences to your life and to improve you internally and to learn about the world. So that's always you stuff. And I do realize that when I'm on the summit day on Everest without oxygen, that my wife is, probably horrified, sitting at home wondering what's going on when I'm on the other side of the planet. And the hardest part of these trips, and I don't know if you have children yet, George, but the hardest part of the trip is saying goodbye. And I can remember perfectly before every expedition exactly that moment where I just say, why do I do this? And it's a constant struggle. Backing the car out of the garage as Jan is driving me to the airport to fly to Halifax to start this row across the Atlantic, and my two kids are standing in the garage crying and waving at me. There's nothing worse. I mean, it's completely emotional, heart-wrenching, and horrible. And I know that when I set off on these expeditions, that all of my peers and people in our social circles, they must think that I'm the most cold-hearted human being on earth to put my family through that. The only thing I can say to that is that, some people are, I don't know if it's meant to do this, but they're predisposed to do these types of things. And I think it's something that I was born into, and it's probably like a flaw in my character that I do them, might say. But I want to say that that flaw, I think, is a lot better than other flaws. And the example I use is if I have a heart attack at age 50 because I don't look after myself, I lead a sedentary lifestyle, I eat too much, I drink too much, and I smoke. And I'm not making judgments on people, but I'm just saying that if I had a heart attack at 50 and dropped dead, everybody would say, "Oh, that's such a shame. He died so young. What a horrible loss. He shouldn't have drank so much and smoked, but whatever, that's sort of the price you pay." However, if I would climb Everest and if I didn't come back or I died up there, people would judge me horribly for that. I risked it all. I shouldn't have stepped out of that tent at high camp without oxygen. How cold-hearted and selfish was that of Laval to do that? But you'll never hear that if Laval dies of a heart attack because he didn't look after himself. So he was just chronically killing himself, where I would do it fairly quickly because of the adventures that I undertake. So our society, our culture tends to judge people who sort of step out from the crowd. And if something goes wrong, I think there might be a little bit of schadenfreude where they go, "Yep, see, that's what happens when you do that," versus the complete lack of schadenfreude when people see that somebody's basically slowly killed themselves from not looking after themselves.
I couldn't agree more with that. And it may seem like an excuse, but this kind of stuff, I think, as we talked about, the post-traumatic growth also enriches you as a person. And if you weren't doing it, but you felt compelled to do it, you probably wouldn't have reached the same personal level of development as you have, which I'm sure helps with your relationships as a husband and a father. And so I think to not do it is also not necessarily the right thing. So if you feel compelled to do this, and you are also taking all the precautions necessary. It's not like you're Dan Osmond or somebody doing some kind of thing like speed free climbing and or one of these Russian kids who are 20 years old doing some free running on a crane who haven't necessarily acquired the skill to do so. You're very methodical and look through these processes, and it's part. So I don't know. In my opinion, I wouldn't see it as a flaw. I'd see it as a strength. But I can certainly see both sides of the coin.
Yeah, and I mean it's the old thing though that we are two adventurers and justifying what we do, and some people just simply won't. They just simply won't buy it. It's keep your head down, go to work 9 to 5, golf on the weekends, And that's what you should do as a responsible parent. And I can't do that. And I do really think that you get judged for this type of stuff, but I don't really care. It's been better for us as a family. I think it has really instilled a sense of adventure and love of the world and of traveling and of current affairs and of athleticism and fitness for our family. And it's a fantastic life. I've paid for it physically. I've lost fingers to frostbite. I've been injured, but it's just part of these experiences you get, and I wouldn't change it for the world.
And I remember reading on your website, and something that you sent was that you tragically lost your son in a canoeing accident. And I'm just interested how your relationship to risk and adventure changed after that.
Yeah, we lost Richard, our 21-year-old son, 3 years ago now. So July 15th it marks the day. And Richard had sort of followed in my footsteps. He had become a pilot. He got his commercial pilot's license, and he was starting his very first job at a place in the Northwest Territories called Norman Wells. And it was the opportunity of a lifetime for him to fly up there and to live in the North. Arctic Canada is a place that I love dearly, and I've spent a lot of time up there. And he was at the height of his powers, 21 years old, just started a job as a bush pilot in this beautiful village between the mountains and the second largest river in North America called the Mackenzie. And one night, Richard, who had been sort of courting a young lady at a girl from Ontario who was working at during the summer as a waitress at a hotel up there, he had been courting her, and he'd been asking her to go in a canoe down the river just for an evening paddle. As you know, in the Arctic, it's 24-hour daylight in the summertime. So at about 9:15 at night, they wandered down to the river, and there's canoes all up and down the river that the locals just leave tied up to a branch type of thing, just hauled up onto the shore. And he got in this canoe, and they'd put their cell phones on the shore and her purse on the shore. And 20 meters from shore, they sort of had a wave that washed over the boat. They kind of laughed about it. But once you get water in a canoe, it tips very easily. The next wave tipped them over, and they laughed. The water's ice cold, obviously. And then they started to get pulled out. It's 5 kilometers across this river, and they started to get pulled out into the middle. So the girl panicked and started to swim for shore. Richard said he was going to stay with the boat. And she started to drown. He yelled at her, told her to lay on her back and just slowly back paddle towards the shore. Some locals who very fortunately had heard Richard screaming jumped in a boat. First of all, they towed it down to the river, got in the boat, and came ripping out into the water. And they saw Callie, who was now starting to go under, and they scooped her up, put her in the boat. They saw Richard by the canoe about 500 meters from shore, and they headed out there, but when they got there, he had gone under. So, a summertime paddle on a beautiful, warm Arctic Canada night just turned into the ultimate tragedy. So 2:30 in the morning, I got the call from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police saying that Richard had was missing on the Mackenzie River. And I'm very familiar with that location. I've been there many times. And I told the constable, I said, well, you and I both know what that means. And he said, unfortunately, I do. And 8 days later, Richard's body was recovered. So we had the ultimate parental nightmare of losing a child, and it didn't cause me to set off on a life of adventure. I'd already been doing that my entire life. That didn't change. I think what it did is it just about destroys you. Obviously, it's an existential, very informative pain that it's hard to describe, and it's there all the time. But it was a blunt, horrible reminder of how short life is and how fragile it is. You know, it gave us I've said this before, it injected us with daily sadness in the family that never goes away. But what I have said is that it didn't completely inoculate us against experiencing happiness. We we can experience just as much happiness as we did the day before Richard died. And we still laugh. We still have fun with our friends. We have two other children, Andrea and Eric, that we can have incredible relationships with, and life is going on. However, we always have this virus of tragedy that's going to be with us forever that we can't get out of our system. And I mean, that's okay for us, but certainly not okay for our boy that we lost. So it's age-old, worst situation in the world to lose a child. And it's a blunt reminder of how short life is. And I've dealt with it in different ways. I mean, when it occurred, I very deliberately sat down, and I was sleeping in our youngest son's bed that night. And I just very deliberately sat down and said, bloody hell, what do I do now? I've got to make up some type of procedure. I've got to stay focused and follow some type of procedure and how we're going to handle this. And, to wake up your wife at, it's now 2:45 in the morning, and quietly lead her into a room where our youngest son couldn't hear what was going on, and break the news about her losing a child is like nothing makes any oxygenless summit of Everest or crossing the North Atlantic. I don't care what the storm is, seemed pretty benign, but we did everything we could to come out of this healthy. We were very deliberate about going to grief counseling, talking to other parents, which helped incredibly about losing a child, and then always talking about it. We never hesitate to talk about Richard. It's difficult when somebody says, how many kids do you have? It's tough to say that we have 3, but now it's only 2. But we made a very deliberate move as a family to come out of this healthy, and I think we have. So when you lose a child, there's nothing positive about it whatsoever. But there is a wisdom that comes out of it, and that wisdom is that life is incredibly short. And 21-year-old is at the height of his powers, and he got the chop on a beautiful night, and it just gives you a newfound wisdom on that and how precious life is. So
yeah, I can't even begin to imagine how difficult it would be to deal with that. But if there's people who are dealing with losing a loved one, what advice would you give to people who are in a similar sort of situation?
I've done a lot of interviews, George, and nobody's ever asked me that. What we did is a friend of ours had lost a teenage boy, his only child. He's a doctor, and he had lost him to a sudden car accident. Just random, going around a corner with a fast car, lost control, hit a pole, gone at age 17. And I remember thinking how on earth could he deal with that? And then a close friend of mine, a pilot here in Canada, his daughter, his wife and daughter were involved in a car accident. He lost his 11-year-old daughter, and I never went to him and said, how did you deal with it? I didn't even know what to say. And I think the only thing I can say is that human beings are designed to handle these types of things. We are 7.5 billion people on the earth because we can adapt to anything, whether it's living in the high Arctic, living in the desert, living in the jungles, or dealing with tragedy. And you have to realize that we have that ability to survive this stuff. So when you're at your lowest moments, when you're suffering so badly over the loss of a loved one, you're in the depths of grief, you have to recall that you will make it through it, that there's been generations and generations of humans just like you who have suffered just as badly and made it.
Yeah. Did you consider afterwards ever giving up adventure?
No, what I did is Richard died in July. I got on my fat bike in Dawson City, and I started riding in the middle of winter to Inuvik. I did that because when Richard was 13 and Andrea was 11, we rode the Dempster Highway, which is this beautiful high Arctic, not high Arctic, but I guess it would be for somebody from the UK or Europe to think of it, but an Arctic highway, a gravel highway. So it's not tarmacked, and it went from Dawson City to Inuvik. And it was this type of road that people come from all over the world to ride on motorcycles, but not on bikes. So I took these two little kids, 11 and 13, and got on our bikes, and we rode it in 10 days, 800 kilometers. And it was such a special time and such a formative time for Richard that he would always say that when times are tough during his training as a pilot or at school or with personal issues, he'd write down, remember the Dempster, which is that highway, because he realized that he could get up that next 14-kilometer long hill that's gravel on a heavy bike with panniers as a 13-year-old, and that he could, handle the swarms of black flies and mosquitoes, which I'm sure you've now experienced, and that he will be able to push through the other side. And so what I did is I wrote it in winter because I wanted to somehow bury myself alone in the Arctic, doing something hard and revisiting that highway. And on that trip, temperatures were minus 46. I ended up freezing my right foot and having to abandon it after only about 4 days. And I spent several weeks in the burn clinic here in Calgary getting my toe worked on. I didn't lose it, but I had previously lost 3 fingers on Everest, but I didn't lose my toe. I went back the next year and did it from reverse direction, from Tuktoyaktuk on the Arctic Ocean to Dawson City in the winter. But to me, it was very cathartic, and it was a way for me to confront a part of the world that was very important to Richard, which was extremely painful to ride by these areas where we camped, and they were all snowed in and nobody around. And I would stop, and the tears would freeze on my face, and I'd remember the kids playing there or setting up the tent with me or throwing rocks in a creek. And I remember those moments, and I think it helped. And then confronting the ocean, confronting the water was another way for me to deal with it, which sounds completely incomprehensible, but I needed to get out there and bury myself again in physical struggle, psychological struggle, and the struggle that only comes with high adventure. And for some reason, I think it helps, and I can't explain why, but these things, to confront it head on and to actually go to where the pain is coming from, for some reason, helps me. And I don't know if that's something that I've got, or I don't know if that's something that growing up as a French Canadian Roman Catholic, where you're supposed to suffer, comes from. I'm not sure, but I'm not saying it's a religious thing because I'm not religious in any respect, but I'm saying that it may have something to do with my upbringing, but it seemed to really help for whatever that's worth. What we've done in the meantime is we started a charity called the Richard St Germain River Rescue Fund, and we've erected these life jacket trees along the river, these metal trees, and they're literally hanging with life jackets, so people can just grab them for free and take them, so that nobody has to go out on that river without a life jacket and end up like Richard and us. So.
Other than things related to your family and losing family, what are you afraid of?
Of not seeing my kids. That would be the ultimate, is not being able to, is not coming back and seeing my kids. I don't. I'm not afraid of the dark. I'm not afraid of water. I'm not afraid of. I don't have a lot of fears. But strangely enough, when I was a child, I was afraid of all those things. I was this scared kid that wouldn't want the light off in the room. I didn't like taking a bath by myself when I was small. I wouldn't even be able to sit on the toilet without my mom in there because I was scared of sitting on the toilet by myself. So it's so strange to me that I've somehow evolved into this person now that does this stuff. So I'm afraid of not seeing my kids, absolutely not seeing Janet. But that's a real sharp impetus to be careful when I'm out there, even though I do incredibly what some people would consider crazy things. I don't, but it's that not being able to see the kids. And I think all parents know that feeling.
Yeah, for sure. On your website, on your About section, it says that you're an expert at turning dreams into goals, into reality. And from all the stuff that we've discussed and reading your adventure resume, I definitely agree with that. But what makes you so good at that?
Well, I've got some pretty big dreams. I mean, the stuff I've done, but what I do is I think it up, and then I don't just tell myself I want to do it. I don't want to row across the ocean. I want to know what it takes to row across an ocean. So I think too many people say they want to lose a stone, they want to exercise daily, but they don't decide to figure out what it takes to do that. And I think it's a very I don't think it's that complicated, really. And if anybody wants the secret to these goals, is you figure out what it takes to get these goals, and then you just set about doing it. And okay, now obviously there's a whole plethora of things that come out of that conversation, but you're not the first person generally that has tried to do this. So you can learn from others, you can learn from the mistakes of others, you can really research what you want to do and figure out how to do it. It's not impossible to do these things. Anybody can do it. I mean, as we're speaking, I'm looking at your website right now, and I'm seeing Benedict Allen, Sean Conway, Henry Bryden on the cover or on your landing page. And all these people have almost these, especially in Conway's sense, these mythical people have these mythical ideas of who his beard is mythical, but mythical ideas of who these people are, but they are all the same. Like they don't have any genetic capability. They don't have any magic that allows them to do this stuff. They figured out what it took to do it. And I think that we can do that. And one of the tricks is to write it down and set a date. And that way you are sort of bound to it. And so by writing it down and setting a date, it goes from a dream to a goal to a plan. And it seems to work. So let me just turn this back to you and ask you a question. What is the end point on your bicycle ride? What's the destination?
Ushuaia, down in Argentina.
So Ushuaia in the southern tip of South America, which is an unfathomable distance for you right now to think about it, because it's so far away and you've got to traverse the entire length of South America. But you're not doing it like that. You're doing it day by day, and then you're doing it literally pedal by pedal. And so when you guys are riding down the road, you're looking ahead, you're going, we're going to ride over that pass, and we're going to have a drink of water there and maybe a sandwich and a snack, and then we're going to go down to this town. So you've broken up this massive undertaking into these tiny little bits, and the tiny little bits for you might be 10K at a time, and then throughout the day 100K in a day type of thing. And eventually you get there, and without just pedaling to Ushuaia, you're doing these little micro goals. And if I could extend that further, I've talked about this before when it comes to I always harken back to aviation, because it's just such a robust way to get things done and get them done properly. So we have these phases of flight that we prepare for in an airplane. Obviously, the most important ones are going to be takeoff and landing. Mm-hmm. Those are the critical points of a flight. And I'm just really trying to be blunt, but those are the critical flight segments. Well, each one of those is broken down into these macro events. So for you, a macro event would be Calgary to Bozeman, for example, or you stopped in Fernie or wherever you went on the way. Those are the macro, but there's all these little steps between them. So for us, it would be the before start checklist. And we do this 54 item checklist. So we've got the macro event, which is the engine start, broken down into 54 little steps, and then we start the engine. And then we do an after start checklist. So now that macro event is done, and then we do all the items after we start the engine. Then we have to do a before takeoff checklist. So that takeoff is the macro event, and we do this checklist that gets us to takeoff. Then we take off, which is the macro event, and we break it down into the micro steps again, which is the after takeoff checklist. Now, once we've done the after takeoff checklist, we've gone into sort of a more benign phase of flight where we're just climbing out to cruise altitude. And that's repeated when it comes down to descent, approach, and landing. After landing and shutdown, we do that. So if you look at an adventure or a goal like that, so we talked about losing a stone. So if I wanted to lose a stone, I'm not going to write down lose a stone. I'm going to keep that in my mind. That's my Ushuaia, but I'm going to say, I'm going to stop eating all these carbs. I'm not going to eat 2 pasties today and a pint of beer. I'm going to stop eating pasties. I'll still have my beer, but I'm going to stop eating pasties. And then you're going to say, I'm not going to put sugar in my coffee anymore. I'm not going to add honey to my tea. I'm going to cut sugar out. I'm going to cut carbs out. And so you start to break it down like that, and pretty soon you're down half a stone, and pretty soon you're down a stone. Then you go, let's go for 2 stone. I mean, if you can afford another 2 stone, I'm not sure, but that's the way you do it. And it's exactly the same as climbing a mountain. You're going to climb to the next rock. You're going to climb to the bottom of that glacier. I'm going to hit the bottom of that couloir and take a break. I'm going to set up my camp there. I'm going to ride my bike to that corner on the highway. As soon as we get to that road that's bisecting the highway, we'll stop there, and you just break it down like that. Now, on an ocean, it's a little different because you don't have any milestones at all. And I've talked about this before, but an ocean is extremely strange in that you're always facing where you came from as an ocean rower, and you're only living on that dream of Ushuaia or that dream of Brest, France. It's behind you all the time, and you can't see it coming. So instead of using physical points to break your day up, like a curve in the road or a bend in the river or a log across the stream or that type of thing, you're using the calendar. You're using hours. You're saying, I'm gonna put 12 hours in on the oars today. I'm gonna make it to this Latin long, that type of thing. But you have to break it down like that because a 5,500 kilometer ocean rowing trip is just far too big to use the macro goal as a way to get you there. You have to break it down.
Wow, that's a long way rowing. I didn't realize it was that far. Whew.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you write your goals down, and how do you actually monitor your progress?
I'm looking at some right now. I just I had a couple of checklists I had to do before this podcast. So I had to get my Mac plug. I had to make sure I found this microphone earlier today. I went to your website and did some more research on it. I've got notes from different interviews I keep in front of me. So that's an example of doing a checklist, which I'm sure you as a podcaster must have a checklist as well.
Sure do. Yeah.
Yeah. So every day I wake up and this is really so basic, but you know what a good day is for you. And of course, a good day for you now that you're on this transcontinental bike tour is slightly different than a good day when you're sitting in your flat back home in the UK. So if I'm back with at your place in the UK, a good day for you will be wake up, have a good cup of coffee, maybe have breakfast, maybe get a run in or go to the gym. I'm not sure. I'm just making this up. Spend an hour writing a blog. Spend 2 hours on a podcast interview or 2 hours researching a podcast guest. Those might be some of the items. And then at the end of the night, have a pint with your wife or a glass of wine, watch Netflix and go to bed. And you know that's your good day. So instead of waking up and just seeing what the day has to offer, why not write down what you want to accomplish that day? So if you want 2 hours working on your podcast, so coffee, 2 hours working on the podcast, hour at the gym, or go for a run down I'm not even sure where you live and if you're in London, but go for a run down the Thames Pathway, for example. Have dinner with your girlfriend or your wife, have a nice glass of wine, watch Netflix, maybe do some reading, and that's a good day. You've checked it off. And we can all do that. We can design our days because we know the secret of a good day, because everybody has a different idea of a good day. So if you keep that in mind, it's really easy to live a life, I think, that is successful in quotation marks by designing it that way, intentionally structuring your day so that by the end of the day, when you go to bed, you go, you know what, that was a good day. But you know why it was a good day? Because I worked at it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. It's such a powerful way. It's so simple, just writing down what you're going to do between each hour and setting some easy goalposts and some goals. But I guess the caveat that I'd add is it can go too far. So I got pretty burnt out back home when I was working in finance, studying for professional exams. I'd started a startup, was trying to do the podcast and live a social life. And it got to the stage where I would plan every single hour of the week with something. And that is also not so healthy either. So there's a fine balance. And I think most people are probably on the side of the scale where they probably could really benefit from having a bit of more structure to their day. But for some kind of personality types, you've got to be a little bit careful that it doesn't become the be all and end all, and you can become attached to these goals, and sometimes it doesn't allow you for any spontaneity. Like if I would see an old friend whilst I was doing something, maybe out on a run, then I would think, well, I've got to go home, do an hour podcast, and then I know I've got a lecture this evening on whatever it is, startups. Then I would sometimes miss out on those opportunities. So like anything, you have to find Aristotle's golden mean and tread somewhere in the middle using a bit of wisdom.
Completely agree. It's not. These are not goals that have a time stamp on them either. It's not like by 10 a.m. I want this done. Or, I mean, if you're coming home from work in the city of London and you decide to stop at the Hung, Drawn and Quartered for a pint with your buddy that wasn't planned, well, I mean, yeah, there's balance. You have to enjoy life as well. And I mean, I'm a guy who, for example, shuns carbohydrates. I'm super lean. I eat a lot of like a high fat, low carb diet. However, I'll tell you, 1 or 2 nights a week, my wife and I will have a nice meal. We'll have wine, we'll have beer, we'll have, bread, that type of thing. I mean, you have to enjoy life too. You can't live like a Trappist monk for sure. When I say what you're doing is you're sketching out a day. You're not carving out a day. You're sketching it out. The next morning you look back and you still haven't accomplished some of the things. But I'm just saying that tends to help me in having a more successful day, because I really don't like going to bed thinking, bloody hell, I didn't get anything done today. Even if I just get a few of those items done, it makes for a better day.
100%. Yeah, I feel exactly the same. Do you still eat a paleo diet whilst you're training for some kind of whilst you're going through intense training, or do you do carb cycling?
I don't know if I'd call me a paleo guy. I mean, I just I just really watch what I eat. I'm in my 40s and I train really hard, and I just like staying lean, and I like being sort of an all-round fit athlete so that I can bike, climb, row, whatever. So I do eat carbs every once in a while, but like I said, it's usually one night a week type of thing, or my carbs all come from vegetables. But I am very strict to that. But yeah, if I'm on an expedition or a trip, and I'm not a zealot when it comes to no carbs at all. I mean, when you're really, for me, when I'm really stepping out hard endurance wise, carbs are a real good fuel. You need that glycogen, I believe. Now, there's a lot of low carb, high fat apostles out there who believe otherwise, but I still seem to need carbs when I'm really pushing it in the in the endurance zones.
So I'm curious now, what would a typical breakfast, lunch, and dinner look like for you? Do you eat breakfast?
I've been trying to avoid breakfast now for the past several months. So eat dinner, sort of do that intermittent fasting type thing, and then eat later. However, if I do have breakfast now, it's simply a smoothie that I make. So in the smoothie, I'll have maybe a teaspoon of blueberry type thing. We also have what's called Saskatoons, which is a wild berry we have here. I'll have broccoli sprouts. I don't know if you're familiar with broccoli sprouts.
Yeah, I know those, the superfood.
Spinach and kale. I grow my own broccoli sprouts. I've always got a good supply of those. So frozen broccoli sprouts, spinach, kale, a little bit of like a vegan, I'm not a vegan at all, trust me, but a vegan protein powder, and a tablespoon of collagen. And then I'll add a tablespoon of unsweetened full-fat Greek yogurt, and a tablespoon of just plain peanut butter. So nothing in it, just peanut butter, not the typical peanut butter that has palm oil and sugar and that type of thing. And then I'll blend that all up, and that's it. That'll be my breakfast. Really like it.
Why the vegan protein powder if you're not a vegan?
I don't know. We've got a couple of different versions of protein powder, but right now that's the one I'm into. It's got a whole pile of greens in it as well. I think that's the only reason, just to get more greens. Oh, and I'll also throw in cauliflower and broccoli, like regular cauliflower and broccoli, as compared to just the broccoli sprouts.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
My counter always has broccoli sprouting on it. Like I've got the trays. It's a hydroponic type thing. You just add water, and I grow my own sprouts. And there's a lot of data that shows that the sulforaphane you get from broccoli sprouts is very beneficial. So I've been broccoli sprout fanatic.
Yeah, I really want to try it. I heard Dr. Rhonda Patrick talking about it on her podcast, and she's got all the science if anybody wants to go and have a little read on it. But
it's funny you say that. It's exactly where I heard. I was running down the highest mountain in Portugal, which is not that high, but it's very beautiful. And I was running down. I'd already summited, and I put on Tim Ferriss's podcast, and he had sort of handed her the mic. He wasn't even on the podcast. And I can remember exactly where I was, and I decided that's it. When I get home, I'm growing broccoli sprouts. And then I started listening to, reading up on it. And I've ordered all the stuff, and I grow them all the time now.
Nice. I can't wait to, when I get home and I get to implement a few of these things, get some broccoli sprouts on the go, get to have a breakfast that's not just porridge and peanut butter for 18 months, which is what the diet consists of right now. It's got to be cheap food, high carbs, Anything. I never want to eat porridge with peanut butter for breakfast, bread with peanut butter for lunch, and spaghetti with some meat for dinner.
I thought you were going to say spaghetti with peanut butter, but that would have been very unique.
I don't know. Maybe we should try that tonight. But yeah, when you're budgeting hard, then that food just can't really be beat.
And you probably have trouble finding Marmite in the U.S. as well.
Sure do. Yeah. I haven't seen any of that, actually. And
that's why you should have stopped by here. We've always got a couple of jars of it.
Oh, next time I'll be there. So Laval, it's been great. Thank you so much for coming on. I've got 2 final quick questions, if you've got a minute.
Absolutely.
Amazing. So the show's called We Need More Heroes, and like you talked about at the beginning, it sounds better than We Need More Role Models. So I went for We Need More Heroes. And the other side is not just having people on who are doing these incredible, inspiring things. It's about people, as corny as it sounds, becoming the hero in their own story, not just settling, not just having these big ideas, actually taking action and doing what they've always wanted to do, and having the inspiration, the guidance, and just getting going. So who are some people for you that, other than your parents, that have been, you would say, your heroes or role models for you?
Well, the one that I can say without hesitation, and you probably never heard of him, but he's a Canadian icon, is a guy named Terry Fox. So when I was a young guy in my early teens, this 21-year-old Canadian had a leg amputated from cancer, and he decided that he was going to raise money for cancer by running across the second largest country on earth. And he dipped his leg in the Atlantic Ocean at St. John's, Newfoundland, and with no fanfare, wearing Adidas running shoes. This was back in the early 80s, with no special padding, cotton T-shirt, and an artificial leg that would make his stump bleed every day. He would run a marathon or more a day. This incredibly understated Canadian hero. And he is, to me, a true hero. He combined pain and suffering with a need to try and raise money for cancer. And the cancer that he had was in his leg. It would be treatable today, meaning that he would survive. But as he ran, little did he know that the cancer had spread, and it eventually went into his lungs. And in Thunder Bay, Ontario, if I remember right, after running through heat and snow and rain and wind, he had to withdraw and died shortly after that from cancer got him. But he's a Canadian hero, and
my God, what an amazing story!
Yeah, Terry Fox. Every school child in Canada does a Terry Fox run every year. It's something. He's a true hero, and he's somebody I really look up to. I have a good mate who died in April from cancer. I don't know why we're on the cancer topic. For some reason, it's just coincidental. And he lived very intentionally, and he's a bit of a hero of mine. He was an airline pilot named Mike Wilson, and I learned a lot from him as a young pilot. And he lived and then died exactly very intentionally. He went for a doctor-assisted death. He didn't sort of wither away, and he was just a true, genuine, hard man with a really soft soul, and so he was a bit of a hero of mine too.
Wow. And do you think that heroes are born or made? Is it nature or nurture?
I'm going to say that they're probably made. And the reason, as soon as you ask me that, I think about Winston Churchill. And if you think about Winston Churchill, I don't know if he would be this icon that he is now if it wasn't for World War II. Although, when he was in the Boer War, he did some pretty fantastic things as well. So there was these hints of heroism in him. But I think it's a combination of the situations you run into and how you handle them. So I don't think if Winston Churchill didn't have the Second World War, he wouldn't be Winston Churchill, if you know what I mean. So, but I guess having said that, he has to have something in him that got him to be able to step up at that time and be the leader that he was for basically the entire world. So,
Yeah.
So it's a combination. but I think it's probably an 80-20 thing where it has to be the situation that you're put into. I mean, Shackleton is another perfect example. Shackleton didn't have a overly successful life as an adventurer, but when all hell broke loose, when he got marooned in the ice in Antarctica, he became he became the epitome of leadership. He fought his way through it, and nobody died. So combination, it's an 80-20 thing. I believe it's the only way you're going to become a hero is if you're put into a situation where that has to come bubbling to the surface.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. Really good. Laval, I've had such a good time. This has been great. Thank you so much for coming on. And for people who want to find out a little bit more about you, where's best for them to go?
You can go to Twitter. I'm fairly active on Twitter. So it's at Laval St Germain. So that's LavalStGermain. There's no period after the T in St Germain. That's the exact same. Instagram is the same, at Laval St Germain. And then, of course, my website is lavalstgermain.com, all without any punctuation. So just LavalStGermain. And there's a contact me portion there. So feel free to reach out. I answer all emails, and I love hearing from other adventurers. And I get a lot of questions after podcasts about, how can I do that? Or how do I get in shape? And those are pretty big questions, but I try and answer all of them. So
amazing. Thank you so much again for coming on the podcast. And thanks everybody for listening. So let's get out there and choose to be the hero in your own story.
It was my pleasure, George. I really like what you're doing. I love your website. I'm going to be following your bike ride as you head south.
Amazing. Great stuff. Well, hopefully we'll have some good stuff to entertain you. The ups and the downs.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Laval. There we have it. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, spread the love and share it with anyone you think would also benefit from it by sharing it on Facebook or Twitter with the hashtag #WeNeedMoreHeroes. Connect with me on Facebook and Instagram at We Need More Heroes and just more_heroes on Twitter. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and in fact any of our other episodes, so get in touch at weneedmoreheroes.co. Thanks so much for tuning in and sharing the love. And thank you again to today's sponsors, Cotswolds Outdoor, Cross Bikes, Garmin and Cumulus for making this show happen. You've heard the magic, now do something with it and be the hero in your own story.